Welcome to The Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, it's Mohawk Night at Blast Zone. This is After Hours. Welcome to The Blast Zone.
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like After Hours, which we'll be talking about today. But before we get into that, Ian, how are you doing this week?
Well, I'm a mixed bag, as I always am. But I brought one little thing I feel positive about. I have been successfully increasing my mid and upper back mobility. The thoracic spine area, if you're familiar. I've always had bad posture, and so as I get older, it's important that I keep working on that so it doesn't get worse and worse. And I've always thought of posture as a problem in the up and down plane, is like standing tall, shoulders back, it's all in this one set of planes. But I recently added these twisting stretches, and not only do they make it easier for me to twist, if I need to reach back for something behind me.
Or if you're just at the sock hop.
Right. If I need to twist again like we did last summer, I can do that. But they also make it easier to stand up straight and tall. So it just feels good to loosen up part of my body that I think was not as mobile as it should be. And I'm going to keep seeing how far I can twist.
Yeah. For the listeners that aren't familiar, Ian is a tall man. So it really would bug me if you weren't using all of your height.
It's like a great power comes great responsibility.
You can't take being 6'2" for granted. Us 5'8" kings will make you pay. So yeah. I'm glad you're taking care of that.
Thank you.
But just be careful. If you don't have that mobility and you try to twist too hard, you might twist and shout.
Yeah. If you hear me shout, you know why. Too much twisting the night away.
I have not been working on my upper back mobility.
That's fair.
But also a mixed bag. To be fair, if anybody told me everything was great, I wouldn't trust them at all.
No.
That being said, the state of the world is scary and upsetting, but I did have a wonderful evening in Albany, New York this past week. I went and saw the Get Up Kids perform their seminal album, Something to Write Home About, front to back. You can see the little robot right there.
Oh, I see him, yeah.
Hanging up on my wall. So that was a very important album for me when I was a teenager. They were like one of the innovators of Midwest emo. Now they're like dudes in their late 40s, early 50s, and they just fucking ripped it. Really cool show. Very small venue, which was awesome. It's my first time seeing them. And I keep knocking off bands. Every time I go see a band, I'm like, that might have been my favorite band that I'd never seen live. I keep moving down the list.
And you do another one. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a nice way to take my mind off things for a few hours.
That sounds lovely, and also the smart thing to do to try to find good distractions in your life.
Yeah, need those. But, you know, another way you can distract yourself is with pop culture.
That's true.
Did you happen to indulge in any that you would like to share with the listeners?
I did. I watched Nosferatu, the latest spooky, moody movie from our guy, Robert Eggers. It is a beautiful movie. It's spooky. It's got some great images, some good performances. The best parts of it are where Eggers is hypnotizing you into a dream state, which is a thing I think he likes to do in his movies, and that's fun.
Totally.
But you might have noticed, listeners might have noticed, we just did a mailbag episode where we specifically talked about our favorite horror movies and specifically vampire movies, and I did not bring this one up, even though I had seen it at the time of recording, because it's just good. I don't think that it's great, and it might be my least favorite Robert Eggers movie, and that's because it's the least engaging one. It's maybe because we know the bones of the Dracula story so well. I was kind of looking to be surprised, and maybe not with a change to the plot, but some kind of bigger shift in the angle that he approached it from. And there's one shift, which is our perception of the Dracula in this movie, whose name is Count Orlok. And Orlok is really cool. It's probably the best thing in the movie. It's the thing that seems to excite everybody.
It's Bill Skarsgård, right?
Yeah, he's really cool. Orlok is the heart and soul of the movie, obviously, as he should be. He's the Dracula. But the other parts fell a little flat. The main character romance, even the mad scientist Van Helsing type guy that Willem Dafoe plays, didn't really do it for me.
Well casted, though.
I mean, perfect.
Just as like a wild, insane person with crazy eyes, can't do better than Willem Dafoe.
Exactly. But I think that's why the expectations were so high. And I'm like, all this dialogue was just on the nose and not that exciting. It's funny because to me, The Witch was such a relatable human family story, much more of a relatable family story than I expected going in. The Lighthouse is less relatable, but it's very richly, sweatily human. And then The Northman was like cooled off tonally, but it suited the sort of ancient mythical framework that it was in. Here, it was like, I just didn't feel like he got the tone right. Maybe it'll grow on me. I'm sure I'll go back to it. But for now, I'm just sort of mildly liked it.
I think The Lighthouse, if you watch it post-COVID, I feel like it's a little more relatable.
Yeah.
But you said you like The Northman more than Nosferatu. I still haven't seen Nosferatu. Listeners listeners will remember, I was pretty lukewarm on The Northman when we covered it.
Uh-huh.
So I do wonder if I'll have that same reaction to it. But you're not the only person I've heard. I think the vibe I've gotten from the discourse around Nosferatu is that a lot of people respect it, but maybe don't love it.
Yeah. And I have a feeling there's more to discover, which is why I'm holding out my final judgment till I don't know when it'll be. But at some point I'll go back and watch it again, and there'll probably be more to enjoy. But it's just didn't take me anywhere new and exciting that I didn't expect to go exactly where it went.
Well, he's got the Wolfman coming up next, or he's doing a werewolf story next. So we'll see how that goes.
I like that. I'm not down on Robert Eggers. I'm still excited for each new thing he comes up with.
Yeah, I almost brought the new Wolfman from Lee Winnell as my show and tell for the week, but I think that movie was just okay. And I have the opposite problem that I've had in weeks past where I didn't have any movies to bring, so I had to come up with a show I watched. But I've watched a lot of movies lately.
That's cool.
One of the new releases that I checked out, just hit streaming, is Companion, starring Jack Quaid and Sophie Thatcher. I think I gave Sophie Thatcher some praise when I was talking about Heretic, the Hugh Grant horror movie. She's also great on Yellow Jackets, which it's a little distracting because she's trying to do like a Juliette Lewis impression while also being her own character. That's a hard impression to do. Juliette Lewis has like a very unique speaking pattern.
Yeah, she's one of a kind.
Truly. But Sophie Thatcher, she seems like she's blossoming into a bit of a scream queen. Like she might be our next big one because she had Companion, Heretic, Yellow Jackets. It's all in the horror genre. And I feel like there's some other stuff that she's done lately, but much more of a gonzo kind of genre movie than Ex Machina, which it's been compared to a lot. She treads some similar water. Oh, it was The Boogeyman was the other one she was in 2023.
Yeah, she's got a run going.
Yeah, but like super fun, over the top gore. But like I told you off mic, it's a horror movie in the sense that horrific things happen, but like you're never going to be afraid. I can't say too much more than that without getting into spoiler territory, even though the marketing around this movie seems to be spoiling it. They still hide the quote unquote twist for 45 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm not sure where people land on how much they know about this movie, and I certainly don't want to ruin anyone's enjoyment of it. But if you ever want to talk about it, hit me up in the Blast Zone email and we can chat.
Do it.
Nobody ever took me up on my requests about what movie was it?
There was something you really wanted to talk about. You're like, hit me up because I need to have.
Oh, it was Strange Darling.
Oh yeah, and I never watched that either. Sorry about that. We let you down.
You sure did. It's the only time I can think of. But After Hours, Ian, what did you know about this movie? Have you seen it before? Did you like it? Did you work on it? Did you previously own the Soho loft that Linda Fiorentino's Kiki lives in?
I had never seen After Hours. I had heard about it when I was younger. You know, I got into Scorsese around Goodfellas, and I was aware of Taxi Driver and stuff like that. And then he had a great sort of what I consider like a modern movies run with Casino, Gangs of New York, Departed, which are old movies at this point, but to me, they were my adult era.
Yeah, they don't feel old.
And I was always curious and never got around to going back to seeing what After Hours was about. Like I really didn't know. And I feel like that's maybe kind of the story of this movie's life. It's like people appreciate it, but nobody goes crazy or makes it their whole personality the way they do for some of his other iconic movies.
Yeah. So I definitely saw After Hours, but it was a super long time ago and enough time had passed where I remembered very little about it. But like the terms that kept coming up when I would see people talking about it were like paranoia, fever dream, nightmare, descent into hell.
Yeah.
And I was like, so I was ready for this like nonstop misery porn. But the movie itself is much more lighthearted than I was expecting. And not that like terrible, scary things don't happen in it, but like it's all treated with this surrealist air where you feel like none of this is real.
Yes. You get the feeling like Scorsese is sadistic. He likes to see his heroes suffer, but he's doing it in a cute way. It's cute little Marty, and he's like having fun with it, and everyone's having fun. So it's not a psychological thriller, which you might think when you hear some people describe it. I mean, it kind of is.
Yeah. Even the poster has like a psychological horror vibe to it.
The one with his eyes sticking out over the skyline?
Or the one with the clock.
With his head winding the clock.
They both give you the sense that you're going to see some fucked up shit. And you do, but like you made a good comparison that like this could, with very few changes, easily be a Woody Allen movie.
It really is like a Scorsese version of a Woody Allen movie because it's about a dorky little guy who gets hit on by a sequence of the hottest women you've seen on screen. And like they don't bother to explain why he's such an incredible sex object. He just rolls with it.
Yeah. 1985, Rosanna Arquette and Linda Fiorentino throwing themselves at Griffin Dunne. And no offense to Griffin Dunne, but come on. You know.
Yeah. He's really good in this. I don't know why, but I feel like Scorsese sees himself in Dunne.
I could see that.
And maybe he does in De Niro as well. Like when Scorsese visualizes himself as a tough guy, he sees De Niro. But when he visualizes himself as more of the funny, good-humored guy that he is, he sees Griffin Dunne. And so I felt like I was watching a Scorsese stand-in on screen.
Yeah, this does feel, especially like we all know what Scorsese was getting up to in the 80s in New York.
Do we? I don't know.
Spoiler alert. It was cocaine.
Oh, okay.
So something tells me he had his fair share of evenings of misadventure and early mornings of misadventure, not to put too fine a point on it. And this is obviously a heightened, exaggerated version of that, but I could definitely see him putting a lot of his own experiences into the script.
Yeah, it's got a lot of idiosyncratic energy and stuff to it that does make it feel personal and makes it feel unique. It's not just another generic movie. And if I understand what I've read about it, like it makes it one of the cherished movies in the Scorsese canon, that it's not a work for hire. It's really something he threw himself into.
Right. And he followed this up immediately with like his work for hire phase. So this was like the last stand of his artistic license. But that's kind of a twisty tale. Mayhaps it's time to get into the making of this movie and its background.
Yeah, for sure. Let's hear how this thing happened.
By the mid-1980s, Martin Scorsese was in a bit of a rut. Sure, Taxi Driver was a hit in 1976, but since then, Hollywood hadn't exactly been kind to him. New York, New York in 1977 was a box office disappointment. Raging Bull from 1980 failed to make money despite critical acclaim, and The King of Comedy in 1982 outright bombed. At this point, Scorsese was struggling to get funding for his passion project, The Last Temptation of Christ, which had just collapsed at Paramount.
Have faith, for in 3 years hence it shall rise again.
He needed a lifeline. A project to keep him working and remind Hollywood he could still make a film on time and on budget. That lifeline arrived in the form of After Hours. Originally titled One Night in Soho, the screenplay came from Columbia University student Joseph Minion, who allegedly based it on a 1982 monologue by radio performer Joe Frank. Griffin, Dunne and A.B. Robinson's production company, Double Play, picked up the script and got it to Tim Burton, who was fresh off his acclaimed animated short Vincent. But when Scorsese expressed interest, Burton, still a Hollywood newcomer, graciously stepped aside.
Apparently, if you say Tim Burton's name 3 times, he goes away.
It was a small, weird project, but it was exactly what Scorsese needed. Filming took place almost entirely at night in New York's Soho neighborhood, further immersing After Hours in the nocturnal paranoia that defines it. Scorsese told lead actor Griffin Dunne to deprive himself of sleep and sex throughout production to heighten the feeling of desperation and exhaustion in his performance.
Scorsese would never have to remind me to be desperate and exhausted.
The film follows Dunne's character, Paul Hackett, through a surreal Kafkaesque odyssey of misadventures in downtown Manhattan, where each bizarre encounter pushes him closer to the edge. Speaking of Kafka, Scorsese lifted parts of Before the Law for the cryptic exchange between Paul and the bouncer at Club Berlin. The shoot was grueling, but the results were undeniable. After Hours was funny, unsettling, and relentlessly stylish. Even some of the biggest names in Hollywood weighed in. Steven Spielberg suggested a more overtly sci-fi ending, where Paul's fate remains ambiguous, but Terry Gilliam, no stranger to surreal narratives, urged Scorsese to keep it grounded.
I think you should keep it grounded by having a giant cartoon foot squash it into the ground.
The film hit theaters on September 13th, 1985, and while it wasn't a blockbuster, it was a success in a way Scorsese hadn't experienced in nearly a decade. It made $10.6 million on a budget of $4.5 million. Not enough to turn a profit once marketing costs and theater splits were factored in, but also not an outright failure. Despite its modest box office returns, After Hours was a critical darling, and over the years, its reputation has only grown. Rotten Tomatoes currently holds it at 90%, and many now see it as a hidden gem in Scorsese's filmography, a sharp, darkly comic nightmare that perfectly captures the paranoia of a night gone horribly wrong. More importantly, it served its purpose. Hollywood was back on Scorsese's side. He followed it up with The Color of Money in 1986, a Tom Cruise and Paul Newman vehicle basically designed to be a commercial hit, which it was. That in turn gave him the clout to finally make The Last Temptation of Christ in 1988, a deeply personal project that would be his most controversial film to date.
People were like, no, there's gotta be more Temptations after that.
2 years later, he'd cement his place in cinematic history with Goodfellas. In the end, After Hours was the weird little movie that saved Martin Scorsese's career. It may not have made a fortune, but it reminded Hollywood and audiences that the man still had something to say. And all it took was a nightmarish odyssey through Soho, some extreme sleep deprivation, and a whole lot of bad luck.
Yeah, I remember The Color of Money. It's funny how it's 1 year later was The Color of Money, and yet that seems utterly contemporary to me, and After Hours feels like a 70s movie, which I guess a big part of that is the difference in budgets, probably.
I think it's Tom Cruise, too, because Tom Cruise is still acting and still appears young, even though he's not.
Right.
Seeing him as a young man in a movie places it like late 90s to me.
Yeah, it kind of drags it forward in our cultural memory. But yeah, this movie was done on a lower budget. It's definitely 80s, but it's like you can see the 70s vibe that New York brought into the 80s, just on the streets and the people. And whereas I don't even know, it's been decades since I saw The Color of Money, but I feel like somehow that lives in a different world. And it was a big deal. Like I remember that movie being a big thing that year. Like that was the movie that you had to see.
It is a good movie too. I really like The Color of Money, but same boat though. I have not seen it in a long time, but I'm kind of amped up to check it out again.
Yeah, I should go back.
And it's the sequel to The Hustler, right? Is that the original?
Yes. Talk about actors joining joining long gaps of time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
That's like early Paul Newman to late Paul Newman. Kind of cool. And then he hands the baton to Tom Cruise, who takes it to today.
Now, to get back onto After Hours, can you imagine a Tim Burton version of this movie? Like everyone, instead of living in Soho lofts, lives in like Gothic castles.
Yeah, there'd be some freaky claymation jump scares and some weirder shit, but there's a lot of weird shit. I think it would be a good fit for Tim Burton. He would have just maybe gone even weirder with it.
And we probably would have got Michael Keaton instead of Griffin Dunne,
Oh,
which
yeah.
would have worked.
Yeah, Michael Keaton would be quite good in this. Griffin Dunne's an interesting cat because, like, when you look up his Wikipedia, I knew him from American Werewolf in London around that same time frame.
Yeah.
And then, like, I didn't know him from anything else for the next 40 years, which is not totally true. He's been in things and he's done TV and he's directed things. But it's funny that Scorsese banked this whole movie on him and he had the potential to do more. And I just feel like he didn't do as much as maybe he might have. Oh, recently he was on This Is Us,
Yeah.
which I watched the first season of, but I don't remember him in that.
I watched Goliath, the Billy Bob Thornton, where he's like a legal fixer show that had Griffin. But that's the thing. I think Griffin Dunne's really good at just being like a guy. He disappears into roles pretty well because going through his filmography, I was like, oh yeah, I've seen that. I don't remember him in it, but I've seen it. That kept coming up. And I was like, I guess that's a sign of a good actor, where like he didn't stand out in a good or bad way. Nothing made me look him up to be like, who is that guy?
Right.
But like, that can cut both ways where I'm like, this person sucks. I got to see who this actor is and why they're getting jobs.
I mean, he's really well suited to play this particular role. I think it was great casting and he really captures that frenetic intensity and that combination of freaking out and also maintaining a sense of humor. Like it really works for me.
Quick fun exercise. Who do you think would play Paul Hackett today if they remade After Hours today? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here.
It's tough in today's environment because like, I feel like you need somebody with real New York credibility. And so many of our top young actors are Irish, English, Aussies.
Yeah, Chalamet is the only one, but he's too cool to be a Paul Hackett type. He's maybe a little young for that role too. I think like I read Paul as like a guy in his 30s who maybe, I don't think Griffin Dunne was in his 30s. Like people just looked older back then for some reason.
That's true.
But I was like, you know, kind of in a dead end job, kind of lonely. So I was thinking like Jay Baruchel.
That's a good one. That would definitely work. It's weird. That young urban professional, like guy who works in an office uptown doing word processing with Bronson Pinchot.
Yeah.
It's hard to recognize what social milieu that suggests today because it's a little bit distant from us now.
I'll tell you one thing. Everybody in this fucking movie would have 11 roommates. No bartenders living in a 2-bedroom apartment with pretty high-end furniture.
Yeah.
Or even Griffin Dunne's character. He doesn't live in a studio. They try to like ugly up some of the apartments by like, oh, the waitress from the bar has rats.
But she has a pretty good spot, actually. Like Griffin Dunne's spot is one of the least fancy, although he does live uptown, so maybe the property values are higher. But they do show him lying on his couch. He has a lot of cable channels. Did you notice his cable box with the little manual buttons for each channel?
Uh-huh.
It's wild. I could spot the ESPN logo and the HBO logo, and then there were a lot of channels that I couldn't read.
Yeah, like that's a technological anachronism that is like before my time. So at first I had to be like, what is that?
What is he doing? Why does he have a big box with a wire coming out of it? And he's punching these big physical buttons that go clunk, clunk when you change channels. It's a different world we live in.
Truly, but if I could go back to the time of After Hours, I would have the sickest apartment in New York. So jealous.
You'd have a cool apartment. You'd have lots of cool punk clubs to go to.
Like Club Berlin. We're getting ahead of ourselves, though. Do you want to get into the story?
Yeah. Let me preface this. This synopsis was a real bear to write.
What happens?
Everything that happens in this movie is so specific that unlike other movies where you go, and then a bunch of assassins attack her on a train until she parachutes out the back. You can summarize that in one sentence because you don't need to know what each assassin did and how it goes wrong in the next scene. But this movie is so specific. The plot points are very small, but they're so reliant one to the next that I felt like I didn't want to wrap it up and go. Then he has a series of misadventures leading to him losing his keys and being out on the street. Like I tried to explain. So this is going to take a while.
You were talking about the Green Knight, right? The scene on the train with all the assassins.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is a weird thing to include in this movie.
Yeah, that was weird, but we were able to summarize it quite quickly.
You do need to include a certain level of detail to really kind of instill the vibe of this movie to listeners.
Yeah, otherwise it'd be kind of like take our word for it. A lot of weird stuff happens and it all connects, but we can't slow down to explain why. We're going to slow down a little bit and try to explain.
All right. You want to take us through the first act?
Here we go. Paul Hackett, played by Griffin Dunne, is a single guy living in uptown Manhattan where he works in a mind-numbingly boring office job. One day, while at a diner after work, a cute girl named Marcy, played by Rosanna Arquette, starts a conversation with Paul. Marcy leaves, but not before giving Paul the phone number where she's staying in Soho with her artist friend Kiki. Later that night, bored and alone, Paul works up the nerve to call Marcy, who invites him to come on over. Despite the fact it's already 11:32 p.m., Paul agrees and he jumps in a taxi. And here begins a long, late night where many strange and unfortunate things happen to Paul. On the high-speed drive downtown, Paul's $20 bill blows right out the window, and when they arrive, the cabbie's furious when Paul says, sorry, but he can't pay. When he gets to the loft, Marcy has stepped out, but the smolderingly attractive Kiki, played by Linda Fiorentino, ropes Paul into helping paste strips onto her papier-mâché statue of a screaming man. Paul soils his shirt with the paste, but Kiki offers him a replacement. Kiki soon falls asleep next to Paul on the couch, leading to an awkward moment when Marcy returns. Nevertheless, Marcy's excited and optimistic about her date with Paul, and she excuses herself for a minute to take a shower. Unfortunately, Paul's curiosity gets the better of him and he pokes through Marcy's bag while she's out of the room. Finding a medical textbook and a prescription skin cream, Paul soon becomes distracted by a neurotic fear that Marcy is concealing some horrible burn scars from him. After a visit to a local diner where the friendly owner comps their coffee, Paul and Marcy return to the loft. Paul smokes a joint to try to calm his nerves, but it doesn't work. Paul's neurotic fears and Marcy's disconcerting tales of her sad romantic history have caused Paul to freak out, and he flees the loft into the night.
Yeah, I think if you really wanted to reduce this movie to a base concept, it would just be like, horny police, open up. Just don't be horny. Don't try to get laid. Nothing bad will happen to you.
Is that the message of this movie?
I don't know if it's the message that Marty intended, but it's certainly what I took away from.
I mean, it's part of it. I would say overall, I think you and I both enjoyed this movie.
Yes, very much.
And so as we interrogate it with questions, it's not to be like, Marty fucked up because it doesn't make sense and we need to explain it. The movie is meant to open up all these questions or raise these points of discussion. And one of the big ones is, why is Paul being punished? Is he too horny? Is he too nosy? Is he too neurotic? I think he's probably all three of those things. But you actually had a very solid other take for what all the havoc implies for Paul.
Yeah, I feel like it was a bit of a common trope from this era. I think it was coined the yuppie nightmare scenario, where Paul is a bit of a square, a bit of a gentrifier, and he's moving around in these spaces that he feels uncomfortable in and other people feel uncomfortable with him being in. There's even the scene where Kiki gives him a different shirt, and it's like a shirt that fits in Soho much more. It's almost like he's trying to infiltrate these cooler neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And he's certainly not like the most noble leading man either. Like the way he treats Marcy is pretty terrible at times, even though we certainly get the sense that she could be like a frustrating person to have a conversation with.
She's a handful.
She's Rosanna Arquette. She made a career playing those kind of roles. Beautiful, but frustrating people. Yeah, but I think Marty is trying to say something about gentrification and the homogenization of New York City, which, geez, can you imagine what he thinks of it now? Because it was still mostly pretty cool back then.
Yeah, like Soho is genuinely lofts and they're not renovated and sold for $5 million each. Like they're occupied by starving artists who are making papier-mâché bagels for a living. And probably
they don't even look like bagels.
They're just round things. They're not painted.
There's no detail.
But yeah, she pays the bills with her paperweights. Yeah, I think your take that it's a yuppies go home kind of thing makes a lot of sense. And in essence, it's just like a commentary on the clash of cultures within the city, like the uptown yuppie and the artists trying to keep Soho weird. Like he's fundamentally out of place and everybody recognizes, like he comes down there wearing a full suit. It is a tan suit, but a full suit and a white shirt and tie.
Yeah, he looks like he's going to, I don't know, a divorce hearing, not to have a date with a Soho lady. But then even like Horst, who we haven't met yet, he's wearing like leather daddy outfit, but he still seems to have principles in a way that Paul doesn't.
Yeah.
So I feel like Marty's trying to say something there as well. Just don't judge people by how they look, judge them by their character.
There's a lot to dig into there, and it helps to keep that take on it in mind as you go through the movie because it's another way to make all the happenings make sense.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Griffin Dunne already, but how do you think he does as Paul? The main role, he's in just about every scene of the movie. We spend a lot of time with him. We suffer with him through quite a bit. What did you make of his performance?
I loved his performance. I think he's great at doing this kind of comedy and this kind of tension, going over the edge and pulling back. It makes for some really good comedy. One little pet theory, which is just kind of mean, but a pet theory for why he didn't make it bigger was like, as a leading man, when you take big close-ups on Griffin Dunne's face in this movie, nobody in makeup and hair did him the favor of plucking his eyebrows, and he's got a really mean unibrow going in the middle. It just, maybe he looks less like a contemporary leading man, and that's why he didn't take off as one.
Yeah, he's definitely been a supporting actor, I'd say, for more of his career. So this does feel like an outlier where he is a true leading man in a Scorsese movie. Like young Ray Liotta, he ain't.
Not quite.
Once you get to know him a little better too, it does feel like it informs his character a little bit that like maybe he hasn't had the most luck with women, even though miraculously everyone in this movie wants to fuck him. Or at least like
yes, he has so much luck and he can't vibe with them. That's part of the yuppie artist clash. Part of why he's turned off by some of the women, I think, including the gorgeous Terry Garr, is like, oh, she's too weird. She's got a funky 50s B-52s aesthetic and like he can't even hang with her for a minute.
She's dancing to the monkeys.
Yeah. That alone is like too much for him. And he's like, I got to get the fuck out. I can't even talk to this girl.
Where does a Mr. Softy driver land on the artist versus yuppie? I guess, are they artists in the same way like Subway sandwich artists are artists? Like, you got to make the cones?
You could view it that way. I don't have a lot of background for Mr. Softy, but you're referring to Act 3 when we meet Catherine O'Hara's Gale, who drives a little ice cream truck.
I'll get into a long diatribe about Mr. Softy.
Oh, cool. Okay. Look forward to that. But one girl, despite being very artsy and fashion forward in a punk artist kind of style, that doesn't turn Paul off is Linda Fiorentino, and we certainly understand why.
Auga. Yeah, a very magnetic performer. She lamented that she took a lot of these roles as a young actor and felt typecast as like a femme fatale.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because she did The Last Seduction. She did Jade. Those are all almost a decade after this, but I feel like that kind of proves her point that she was still being cast as like the beautiful, dangerous, mysterious woman. And that's Kiki to a T for sure.
Yes.
But her friendship with Marcy is like something I would have loved to see more of because they could not be more different. Like Kiki is so self-assured and Marcy is not.
It's cool. It's a very rich little pairing of characters there. It's funny because I think I met Linda Fiorentino, not actually met, but first became aware of her in Men in Black, where she was already sort of outside of the femme fatale mold.
Yes, and that was a big role for her too. But there are rumors that the reason she was written out of the sequel was because Tommy Lee Jones said it's her or me.
Whoa, that's weird.
I know, Tommy Lee Jones being a grumpy dickhead.
No, I guess he's got a few grumpy stories attached to him. It's not really surprising, but why her? I don't know.
I cannot condone your buffoonery, right? Isn't that what he said to Jim Carrey?
Yeah, I can imagine not condoning buffoonery, but not condoning her sex pottery is a harder thing to turn away.
I think I first noticed her in Dogma because I was like 12 when Dogma came out.
Okay.
Dogma's a great movie when you're 12 because like it's talking about those subjects that you think are very deep and important, like religion and more religion, but like doing so in a very not that introspective way. I don't think Kevin Smith is a good filmmaker. That's one of my hotter takes. I think he's a bad director, but seems like a super nice guy.
Seems like a cool dude. I did see him at a farmer's market one time.
Tidbit.
I didn't introduce myself, but I saw him pass by. Go buy some hummus or something.
Living in LA, I'm sure that happens to you more. I don't know if I've told the story on the podcast, but I'm pretty sure I've told you that one of my only encounters like that was seeing Sam Rockwell in line.
Oh, yes.
At a coffee shop. And I just had the intrusive thought that I could just punch him and be on the news.
Punch Sam Rockwell, which it does sound like an intrusive thought. It doesn't seem like something you would think of normally when you thought about Sam Rockwell was your desire to punch him.
No, I would love to like hug him and be his best friend.
Yeah, exactly.
But punching him is so much faster than you run away. And you're just like, actor Sam Rockwell was randomly assaulted in Astoria, Queens this morning.
I'm glad you didn't. I'm sure he is too.
Yeah, he probably would have whooped my ass. Who knows? It depends, I guess, what movie he was like getting ready for to film at the time, how in shape he was. And anywho, I don't know how we got on Sam Rockwell. Let's talk a little bit about Rosanna Arquette. We talked in depth about her sister Patricia when we did True Romance, but this is her first appearance on The Zone.
Yeah.
As far as I know. By the way, her sister Patricia is still killing it on Severance, even though we haven't seen her for a couple episodes.
So great on Severance, like just wowing me every time I see her.
She was also excellent in Escape from Dannemora. She's having a real late career resurgence, I think.
Yes, I remember that.
But Rosanna Arquette in this movie, she's very like laying the groundwork for, like we said, that signature Rosanna Arquette style where she's a little out there, maybe a little frustrating. I remember seeing her for the first time and really like noticing her in Pulp Fiction and then also in The Whole Nine Yards with Bruce Willis and Matthew Perry.
Okay. I didn't see
Remember that movie?
I remember it existing, but
yeah, it's a bad movie.
Was she any good in it?
She's doing some weird accent work in that movie that I don't think works.
Okay.
So I remember being like, what's with this accent? Even as a child, that doesn't sound like anyone I've ever known. But yeah, I think a lot of people remember her from Pulp Fiction as one of the people who helps revive Uma Thurman's character when she ODs. She's at that house where you've seen Pulp Fiction, right?
Yeah, but it's been so long I couldn't place Rosanna Arquette in it.
She's at like the drug dealer's house and she helps administer the adrenaline shot, brings her back to life.
That shot made an impression on me at the time.
Yeah, she was in the room for that one. She didn't actually drop the needle. But yeah, so what's your relationship with Rosanna Arquette?
You know, I don't know. Obviously, she's a very familiar name and face through the years, but I felt like I was really discovering her in depth for the first time in watching this movie. I was delighted by her. She plays a kooky character. She plays a character with a tragic arc, which we'll get to in Act 2, and she invests it with so much real energy. It felt like there was like really genuine, honest feeling rom-com moments, both when they first meet and when he first goes back to her apartment, that were just fun. I'm like, oh, this is a fun romantic comedy because this is, you know, an exciting young woman that's like bubbly and quirky, but carries so much joy in her. And I'm like, that's cool that she was able to put that much on screen in a movie that's really about surreal Kafka-esque nightmares.
She feels almost like a subversion of the manic pixie dream girl trope in the sense that like she has a lot of those qualities that are considered desirable from those type of characters, but fully three-dimensional in the sense that like she has trauma and she might be an unreliable narrator to some extent. And there's some backstory that is certainly like upsetting to her. And she's not just like the same way we talked about so many of the movies we covered from 2024. Characters don't feel real, like they don't exist when they're not on screen, but she feels like a person who exists fully all the time.
Even when she's in the next room showering and you're going through her prescription creams.
Or telling her roommate that she has a great body.
Yeah, he's kind of a scumbag. He's like a horn dog. The dude hopped in a cab at 11:30 on a school night, on a work night to go downtown and try to hook up with a girl.
Man, you couldn't get me out of the house at 11:30. Not even for Rosanna Arquette. It's bedtime.
In our point of view, that's his biggest sin. That's what he deserves to be punished for.
Yeah.
The hubris of leaving the house after dark.
But I did like how she flips it. She almost deflects his comment about her body and is just like, yeah, I don't have any scars. I think that kind of like plants the seed in his head and makes him like, how bad are the scars on Marcy that she's got this cream? And then that gets subverted later too.
There's so many twists in their conversation that are kind of outrageous because it's a broad, wild comedy movie. And it's these two people getting to know each other and they're in this place with romantic tension. They're lying on her bed having this conversation and it goes through highs and lows and back and forth really quick. But she manages to navigate all those and not have them feel forced like she had to take the next point of view because the script told her to. It feels like a real person going through those waves of emotion. It's really good stuff.
Was there anything else from this section you wanted to touch on, or should I move on to the middle act?
Let's move on. It's a long night, man. We got to get through it.
It's true. I got a date at 11:30. Out on the street after leaving his date Marcy at the loft, Paul gets soaked in a sudden downpour, so he decides to try to take the subway home. He has almost enough change, but a new higher subway fare just went into effect at midnight, and the attendant won't give him a break. So he's right back out into the rain. Then he ducks into a deserted all-night bar. The lone waitress, played by Terry Garr, tries to get friendly with Paul, but he avoids her attention and instead asks the bartender Tom, played by John Hurd, to borrow money for subway fare. The cash register drawer won't open, but they work out a deal. Paul will run over to Tom's nearby apartment to grab Tom's cash, but will leave his own keys at the bar to ensure his return. At the apartment, Paul gets hassled by Tom's neighbors who are freaked out after a rash of burglaries in the neighborhood. Then as he leaves, Paul sees what looks like a pair of burglars trying to load Kiki's screaming man sculpture into their van. He scares the guys off and drags the sculpture up to Kiki's loft, where Kiki informs him those were her friends, who she just sold her TV to. Then Kiki convinces Paul to go to Marcy's bedroom and apologize for ditching her earlier. When he enters the bedroom, he's horrified to find Marcy dead of an apparent overdose of sleeping pills. But when he comes out, Kiki has already left the apartment to go to a club. So Paul places an anonymous call to the cops. Paul heads back to the bar to reclaim his keys, but finds it closed and locked. Tom has just stepped out, but Julie the waitress sees Paul and invites him to wait with her in her apartment across the street. Unfortunately, Julie and her apartment are both a bit quirky, and once again, Paul gets freaked out by a woman's peculiarities. Promising to return, he ducks out of there the moment he sees Tom returning to the bar. But before Tom can give Paul's keys back, Tom gets a phone call informing him his girlfriend has just committed suicide. Paul is shocked to hear Tom say his girlfriend's name was Marcy, and then he immediately worries whether Julie is okay and goes to check on her. When he returns, Tom has once again left and locked up the bar, so Paul goes back to Tom's apartment looking for him. But seeing Paul lurking around again, Tom's neighbors become convinced Paul is a serial burglar and start chasing after him. Paul then goes to Club Berlin, where Kiki said she went for a drink. But it's Mohawk night, and before he can talk to Kiki, punks in the club grab him and try to shave the side of his head. Paul escapes the bar and must continue to flee the vigilante mob, now roaming the streets of SoHo looking for the serial burglar they believe is him. He even pops back into Kiki's empty loft to snatch a $20 bill he had spotted earlier, stuck to the papier-mâché screaming man. Coming out, Paul spots a cab, only to realize it's the same driver he accidentally stiffed earlier. This time, Paul waves his $20 bill to show he's good for the money, but the angry cabbie snatches it and drives off, leaving Paul again broke. and out of luck. Good Lord. That was a longer act than any monologue I've ever written, I think.
Yeah, that was the longest stretch of act two we've ever seen.
But like you said, a lot's happening, a lot of big events going down, and it's important to paint the picture for the listeners.
And maybe we could have just summarized and go, well, you got to see it, but there's all these reasons that he goes back and forth from here to there. Even in trying to summarize this, we go, okay, he worked out a deal with Tom the bartender. There are little elements that get dropped in that dialogue, in that conversation, that explain and justify everything that happens. Like, why would a guy who comes into a bar and only needs to borrow 50 cents have to end up going to the bartender's apartment with his keys to get some cash? It's like they gave the broken cash register as one excuse, but then they gave Tom the bartender two other quick excuses that get dropped in the dialogue about he's also worried whether he left his burglar alarm on because there's been a rash of burglaries. And, there was one more thing. There was the key to the cash register. He left that in his apartment. So now he's got two more reasons why he would need to ask Paul to go down there for him. And there's so many little details that all add up and come back and repeat and lead to the next thing. It's kind of insane. It's kind of an achievement for Scorsese to make all that go by, but the movie doesn't feel like you're reading a list of complicated plot points. It feels like a lot of stuff is just happening.
Well, I think the dialogue is done well enough too, where it does feel like people having real conversations.
Yeah.
So it doesn't immediately stick out to you as like exposition or like filling in potential plot holes.
Yeah, just like justification. And then you got great actors like John Hurd, who's just really fun to show up in the middle of the movie as the bartender.
Yo, young John Hurd was a babe. Who knew?
Yeah.
A handsome lad. He's
I recognized his face and I didn't realize who I was seeing until I looked it up. But he's a great presence in the center of this film.
Yeah. Home Alone was such a big part of my childhood. I recognized him immediately.
Okay.
And I was like, that's fucking John Hurd. But I did not recognize Will Patton at all until later, which is super weird. Because I also think of Will Patton as like a squirrely little guy.
Right.
But Horst is kind of imposing physically. So like it didn't even match up in that sense to me.
Yeah. He's very young in this. He's tall. He stands very erect. His face is gorgeous and chiseled. And it's not the Will Patton that
he's got hair, which like Will Patton has always had like the kind of horseshoe as like an older actor.
Yeah. And frequently acts in a beard and mustache, and Horst is clean shaven. It's like a whole different guy. Who knew you could shave a beard and mustache and be a whole different guy?
I mean, I think the one time I trimmed my beard too short, my daughter cried for like a while. So yeah, I know that you can be a whole different guy if you shave your beard and mustache. We did cover Will Patton in The Punisher, if you recall, where he's much older, much more of like the squirrely little weirdo that we've come to expect from him.
Yeah, that Will Patton was easy to recognize, even going from there to where he's playing a really elderly guy like in Outer Range, which we also loved him in. You can connect the dots easier than go all the way back to 1985 Horst.
Yeah, love Will Patton. Shouts to a real one, unless he's a bad person, but I don't think he is.
Yeah, always got to throw that in there.
Right. I haven't done extensive research on his moral character, but hopefully he's cool. Always get him confused with Bill Paxton, RIP to a real one.
Yeah.
They ever work together? They probably did. It just feels like they should have.
It feels like they should have.
And once again, this is our 6th, 7th week in a row with no justified crossover, but you were mindful enough to call out that Will Patton sure feels like he could have been on Justified.
He feels like he's an honorary Justified guest star with a full half-season arc to him because he's just that kind of guy.
Right. Maybe not like the main bad guy, but the main bad guy's main guy.
Yeah.
Because like I did say, Garrett Dillahunt did pop up for half a season, and he is a modern day Will Patton to me.
I mean, Will Patton didn't have to pass the torch because he's still going, but Dillahunt is another great guy in that mold.
I fucking love Garrett Dillahunt. Every time I see him, I get excited. The subway fare.
Yeah.
Am I remembering correctly that he had 98 cents to begin with, so he still didn't have enough, even if the hike hadn't gone into effect?
Yeah, he was like 97 or 98. I guess the subway, he was expecting it to be $1, and then the guy's like, it's $1.50.
Which is an insane hike. A 50% hike in one day is pretty extreme.
Yeah, it seems like a reasonable amount of money still for a subway ticket, but I guess I don't know how it seemed in 1985.
Right. Now I think it's 4 and change, maybe 5. Okay. It's been a while. But when I was growing up, it was always 3. That was the subway fare of my youth.
Okay.
It was $3 a ride. But we had Metro cards. No one ever paid with cash.
Right.
I think I started taking the buses and trains when there still was a cash option, but like no one ever used it. There was still that little tray where you could throw your change in, and it would.
Okay.
But like probably when I was like a teenager, they just got rid of those, and it was just swipe your Metro card or fuck off. Now you can do it with your phone.
Yeah, this is old fashioned, and his interaction with the ticket attendant is one of the funny bit part interactions in the movie.
I could go to a party. I like that the guy doesn't have any faith in himself. Like I could go to a party and get drunk and tell somebody that I let you skip out on the fare.
He's explaining why he can't let him pay 97 cents for $1.50. And it's not because his cash drawer won't add up at the end of the night. It's because he might get drunk and tell someone in the future gonna get fired.
And Paul's terrible luck continues when he leaps the turnstile and is immediately greeted by a police. Like, how did he not see that cop when he went to jump the turnstile? He's clearly right there.
He was only off camera. He was not off reality.
That felt like a choice too. Like, not to be like a cop saw him from afar and follows him to track him down. No, he jumps the turnstile and basically lands in a cop's chest.
All the unfortunate happenings are heightened, but they just work because they're well executed. So you don't stop and question. You just enjoy them.
Then we talked a little bit about Terry Garr, but her apartment deserves its own little section of the breakdown because there are hints that we're not far off with Paul's horniness being his downfall. In the bar where Julie works, there is a drawing of a shark biting a boner.
Yeah.
There's also like the timing of the mousetrap smacking down lines up anytime the two of them start flirting. So
yeah, she's got a bunch of mousetraps or rat traps out in her apartment, and they're a little bit surreal because the camera pans over to them for one shot, and each one is individually lit with a little spotlight on it, which is probably not the reality. That's the heightened reality.
Well, she wants to make sure the mice see it.
This is the most Tim Burton-y scene. Like, her apartment is just weird. She's got racks of Aquanet hairspray cans, and it's all bright yellow like her dress.
She got the beehive hairdo. Yeah, she needs to keep that thing vertical.
Yeah, but to me, the hairdo didn't really stand out. So yeah, one theory for why he's like totally revved up for Rosanna Arquette and Linda Fiorentino and then repulsed by Terry Garr, which I'm like, what's going on there? And it's like, has he already learned his lesson and turned his sex drive off? He's like, it's gotten me into trouble so far tonight and I'm not talking to another woman. Or is it like her hairdo was supposed to be weirder to him? And part of that is, yeah, maybe he's more yuppie. It just looked normal. I guess today people who dress retro kind of fit in because there's somebody dressing like every time period at all times now in our modern era. But I guess maybe then that was more like a red flag if you saw somebody who seemed to be stuck in the 50s.
Yeah, she does look like an extra from Grease a little bit, but it's not so heightened where it makes sense his reaction. Like, it doesn't explain his reaction to it.
Until later when she has some outsized comedic reactions when he says gee whiz and she loses it, like people shouldn't say gee whiz to her and she's just trying to live her life.
She looks exactly like the kind of person you should say gee whiz to.
Exactly.
Looks like a fucking background character on the Jetsons.
It's not like Paul isn't given some reasons to be like, ooh, I should maybe excuse myself from this situation too. But at first she's flirting. She leaves him a little note on his table. I thought that was like a totally cute flirtation that you would think Paul or a man in a situation would respond to. But
yeah, lest we forget, he came downtown to hook up with a cute blonde and he fucked that up. Yeah. But lo and behold, there's another cute blonde that wants to hook up with him.
She's not the last one.
There's at least two more. So, and then Marcy's death scene is probably the darkest moment of the movie, but the movie doesn't really dwell on how fucked up it is. Like, he's right back out on the street and kind of making his moves to try to get back to his apartment. Like, he doesn't seem to give it too much consideration.
There's like a couple moments where he freaks out in a way that you go, okay, he didn't just blow it off like, oh, well, she's dead. But the movie goes right from that really dark moment. Because it's like we said, it's a character you like, Marcy. Like, she's like, you're sympathetic to her and she's fucking dead. And, you know, he discovers her in this awful way where he's talking to her and then he realizes he's talking to a dead girl. And then right away it pivots to a joke where it goes back to his neurosis where he keeps thinking there might be some horrible scar on her thigh and he like can't help but peek at the dead girl's thigh. And then it has this silly little skull with roses in his teeth and a top hat tattoo.
I actually have that same tattoo in that same spot.
Oh, do you? Okay. Maybe if I find you dead, I will not be able to resist peeking.
You have to investigate.
But then he takes it, then in a really like horn dog, sick, dark comedy moment, he keeps going. He's like, I got to find the scars. There was scars on her body, right? So he pulls the blanket all the way off her and her body is gorgeous and amazing, even in death. And so it's kind of like a message that he rejected her and caused her to end her life over nothing, like over just a totally unfounded fear, which makes it more fucked up.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what to take from that. What does it tell us about Paul or yuppies?
Or what does it tell us about Marty? Because he blithely blasted through that scene. But it doesn't turn you off to the movie. It works in the context of the movie. It's dark when you think about it. And obviously it's dark for real. We're not trying to minimize the topic here, but it doesn't seem to bring the movie down because the movie's not that grounded. Like, it's not that realistic.
It's not, no.
So you don't feel really sad.
If this was the movie I thought it was going to be, then Paul spends the rest of the movie trying to cover up his tracks. And like, I was never here. But like, he doesn't do any of that. He keeps going in and out of the apartment. He's trying to track down Kiki to tell her about Marcy, but like at the same time, also trying to get home. Like, if he had found a way home, would he have still tried to go to Club Berlin, or was that like, just I'm stuck down here anyway? I might as well.
Yeah. No, I think he wouldn't have. He wouldn't have gone to tell Kiki if he wasn't forced to continue running around the neighborhood longer than he wanted to.
And it's almost like that's driving home the point of how they live in different worlds. Like he would never even consider that maybe I'll run into her again at some point and then I'll have some splaining to do. But no, because Soho is not a place for you, Paul.
No.
Now it is. Like today's Soho, Paul would be fine.
Right.
There are very few enclaves of weirdness left in Manhattan.
I'm sure.
The ones that are mostly lower Manhattan still. Like the Bowery has weird parts, Alphabet City, but that's about it. And like we did the math. At some point, you just got to start walking uptown, man.
Yeah.
Like, you'd get there. It'd be late. You'd be tired. And I know 1985 New York, the streets weren't that safe. What are you going to do? You got to get home.
And he's running around the streets anyway, and people are trying to kill him. So it can't be that much more dangerous to just try to walk back uptown. I think Google Maps said the walk is like 90 minutes from where he was in Soho up to.
Yeah, he's in like the high 80s, right? Is where his apartment is, which is, I've certainly walked further distances in Manhattan in a day. It's pretty flat. It's not that hard.
I guess one thing is he still never got his keys back, which is one little plot twist. That there was a lot of twists that kept separating him from his keys when he would almost get them and then something else would take them away again. So there's a lot of that. The first of all was like the rain was a reason he didn't just try walking. So the movie it's actually pretty good for someone like me when I'm always looking for motivation holes and plot holes and logical gaps. This movie kind of justifies just about everything, especially for the fact that it's kind of a silly, surreal movie.
Do you want to take us to the silly, surreal ending?
Yeah. Paul catches another break when the woman who got out of the angry cabbie's taxi, Gail, played by Catherine O'Hara, invites Paul to come up to her place and use her phone. But once upstairs, Gail proceeds to derail Paul from being able to call his friend, and he yet again loses patience with a strange woman he just met. Gail says don't worry, she'll take him home in her ice cream truck. But when they get out to the street, Gail sees one of the wanted posters with Paul's face on them and joins up with the vigilante mob instead. Paul again flees through the neighborhood until he finds someone else to take him in one more time. This time it's a gay man named Alex. In Alex's apartment, Paul unloads the story of his entire crazy night so far and finds a little sympathy but no real help. Back on the street at 4 a.m., Paul ducks back into the diner where he runs into Tom and asks about getting his keys back from the bar. But at that moment, the vigilante mob arrives outside and Tom ends up siding with them too, forcing Paul to once again flee. Paul tries going back to Club Berlin again, but now it's deserted except for a sad older barfly named June. With his last quarter, Paul puts a melancholy tune on a jukebox and slow dances with June. Now that she's sympathetic to him, June takes Paul into her apartment downstairs when the vigilantes show up at the club. June also happens to be a papier-mâché artist, and so when the mob threatens to break into her place searching for Paul, she gets the idea to rapidly cover his entire body, turning him into a statue. The vigilantes angrily go through her place, but they don't spot Statue Paul. Then, when June steps out to see if it's safe outside, the burglars that we met earlier, Neil and Peppy, played by Cheech and Chong, proceed to infiltrate June's place through a manhole in the street. Seeing what they think is Kiki's Screaming Man statue from earlier, they decide it's the only thing in the place worth taking, so they put it in their van. And as the sun comes up, the burglars race uptown with their van full of stolen loot and Paul. Taking one corner too fast, they hit a bump and the back doors pop open, spilling the Paul statue onto the street where it shatters and frees him. Standing up, Paul realizes he's been dropped right in front of his office building just as it's opening up. So he heads inside. Dazed and covered in plaster of Paris, Paul sits down at his desk to start a new day.
First things first, we already met young John Hurd, and I talked about how important Home Alone was to me as a child. Now we meet young Catherine O'Hara.
Imagine that.
They never interact with they do interact with each other a little bit because he joins the mob that she's now leading.
That's right. That's true.
But she's kind of an infuriating character.
The ladies get weirder and weirder, maybe. At least there's a rhythm to them. There's up and down. Like Marcy was weird. Kiki was more weird and off-putting. Alex is quite normal in terms of the people that take him into their apartment. Julie, the waitress, is pretty weird. And then Gail is very self-focused. She wants to talk about herself, up to and including harassing him while he's trying to remember the number that information just gave him, making it impossible to call his friend.
And I think the movie does a really good job of putting us in Paul's state of mind when that's happening. Because at first you're like, oh, that's cute. Maybe she's flirting with him a little bit or whatever, like doing a bit.
Right.
He's trying to remember the numbers and she's calling out random numbers. Like we've all done that or had that done to us at some point. But then she keeps going and I'm like, shut the fuck up, lady.
Yeah. And he plays that moment really well. That's one of those things where he yells at her for a second and immediately goes, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You got to understand I'm under so much stress. That was a really fun scene.
And she keeps bringing up that she's a Mr. Softy driver with no context or reason behind it. She's like, yeah, you need a special license. And
yeah, she just wants to rattle rattle on all about herself.
I own my own truck. I don't rent it. We're like, all right. But yeah, so they don't have Mr. Softies in LA, huh?
Not that I know of. Is that a truck that would go through your neighborhood when you were a kid?
It was the ice cream truck of New York. Like it was every summer, you'd hear the jingle. It goes dee 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 dee, which is like, that is like a nursery rhyme. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, but I can see where that would get the kids running outside.
Just blares over the loudspeaker. But like Mr. Softy was cool because it wasn't like a good humor truck. Like it wasn't just like frozen bars. You could actually get like soft serve, and they would do the dips, the candy shell dips where it would harden, get like that. And then you get sprinkles and stuff.
Oh, yeah. I never had exposure to that.
It was really good. I miss Mr. Softy.
I can remember an ice cream truck that would come along the back gate of my elementary school when I was a kid. But I think that was that good humor stuff. It was like bomb pops and creamsicles and that kind of shit.
They had some of that on the Mr. Softy trucks, but most people were going like, and they actually had really solid milkshakes. Ooh. You could always get a good strawberry milkshake from Mr. Softy.
Oh, damn.
I love a strawberry milkshake.
Man, if a milkshake truck passed my house right now, that would certainly bring me out to the yard.
But there was also always the rumor of, oh, that Mr. Softy truck is the one where you can buy weed. But I never bought weed from a Mr. Softy truck, I can say.
Yeah. I don't know anyone that's bought weed from that, but in LA, it's the little paleta salesmen that serve the Mexican style goodies. People would always talk shit. Oh, they're really drug dealers, which is probably just some kind of racist shit talking for the most part.
No, like what kind of stuff did they sell? Like churros or?
There's churro cart guys too, but the frozen pops in Mexico are quite popular. Various sort of fruit bars and frozen things on popsicle sticks.
I don't know if it's a true Mexican dessert or like an American Mexican dessert, but I do love fried ice cream.
Ooh, okay.
You ever have that?
Maybe. Not much though. I don't know the origin of it.
It's always at Mexican restaurants, but like ones in America. Like I've never been to a Mexican restaurant in Mexico that had it.
Is that like something they would bring you out with a single birthday candle in it?
Yes. Okay. I do remember a little tidbit. I worked at an office on Long Island for a little car insurance company that rhymes with Geico. But one of my coworkers had given birth like 6 months before, but there was a Mexican restaurant we would order food from like once a week. And she would always ask for the fried ice cream. And they'd be like, we don't do delivery for the fried ice cream. She's like, but I'm pregnant. And she must have been telling them that she was pregnant for 15 months straight. And they never caught up. Or they just didn't care. Like they're like, if you want it that bad, because they're like, oh, it doesn't travel well. Like it's going to get weird in the commute.
Yeah. If you insist, he's going to get a mushy puddle.
That was a good restaurant too. I don't remember what it was called, but it was really solid food. Okay. Sorry. Got distracted by the Mr. Softy talk.
Ice cream took us on a big loop there. See if we can get back to this movie.
Young Catherine O'Hara, another babe that just invites Paul up to her place willy-nilly. But she is actively off-putting, whereas June and Marcy are like sweet but flawed.
Yeah, she pushes Paul hard and he doesn't have anything left. Like he loses it right away.
And she also like very quickly falls into this kind of vigilante justice mode.
Oh, yeah.
So that seems to tell us something about her character, too, that she's like leading an angry mob almost immediately after finding out that this guy might be.
Yeah, she doesn't ask him about it. She sees a poster on a lamppost that he doesn't see as they walk past it. And she immediately blows her rape whistle and calls the crowd of murderous vigilantes down the street.
But then he's rescued by June, who was played by, you have her name?
June was played by Verna Bloom.
Verna Bloom, who was like top billed for this movie, interestingly enough, even though she does not appear until towards the end, the middle of the third act, really. Yeah, she was quite a well-known actor, I think. I think she was already considered towards the end of her career when After Hours came out.
Okay.
Because like she only made a handful of movies after that. And they were all like another one in 1985. And then she was in The Last Temptation of Christ. So she was working with Marty again. And then she didn't work again until she was on one episode of The West Wing in 2003. So doesn't have a lot of dialogue, but still is very like evocative. Like you really get a sense for who this person is just through her like longing glances at Paul and the kind of melancholy in her eyes.
Yeah, it's a touching moment because it's slightly pathetic that Paul has had these little encounters with these various young age appropriate women, all very beautiful. And then he meets this slightly older, sadder woman who just drinks in a bar at 4 a.m. But he's fully broken down at that point. And he says, as they're dancing, he repeats, I just want to live. I just want to live. And because he's surrendered everything that he brought with him down to Soho, he gets to enjoy this moment of uncomplicated tenderness from June, where she brings him down to an apartment and he just puts his head on her shoulder and she sort of holds him and pats him. And it only lasts a minute because the fucking vigilantes start slamming on the door a moment later. But it's really interesting that he had this tenderness that he couldn't experience from any of the other people that he had encounters with the rest of the night until he was fully broken down.
Yeah, he's no longer horny.
Guess he had the horniness beat out of him, and now he can just experience love in a raw way. It's nice.
But then then, yeah, it gets super weird with June, too. I don't think she ever intended to let him out of that paper mache sculpture. I think he was in there for the long haul.
Oh, that's a good observation. I took her to be an honest broker, and that she really was concerned about his welfare. And she just was like, the fucking vigilante crowd is insane. They come busting through her apartment, and they've got like baseball bats, and they're like beating the couch cushions to see if there's anybody there. They're like ready to kill if they find anything. So she's understandably quite scared and trepidatious about letting him back out. But he's, again, victimized by that fear because, I mean, my claustrophobia goes off the charts when I imagine being trapped in a paper mache sculpture.
What do you make of the fact that there are two paper mache sculptresses who also make plaster of Paris bagels as paperweights?
That's not mentioned.
In the same neighborhood.
Kiki's paperweights play a big role into getting him down there. He uses that as his excuse when he blows up and ditches Marcy the first time. Then he finds out later that Julie owns one, and he freaks out when he sees it and says, "Get that out of my face." And then very subtly, we meet this paper mache artist and we see her studio, and there's one shot that I just caught where there's a stack of fucking paper mache bagels on her shelf in the background.
This was a cottage industry in New York in the 1980s, apparently.
Is that like a thing? Is that come from some real life thing, you think, and why they lean so hard into that gag? It's funny.
They're trying to draw some kind of parallels between June and Kiki, but like their characters couldn't be more different. One is meek and mousy and lives in a basement apartment that's very cluttered, and one is very confident and lives in this kind of cavernous loft.
Yeah, the top floor loft, and they are like bookends, opposite ends of the spectrum of an artist's life in Soho. It's very interesting to picture them that way.
And also, Cheech and Chong breaks into both their apartments.
That's true.
I guess they didn't break into Kiki's. They were let in.
Neil and Peppy are a real hazard to that neighborhood because the Tom's apartment neighbors are like, they broke into our building 5 times already tonight. Those guys they're a menace.
That's just greed. Yeah, that's crazy.
They're going buck wild in Soho.
It was weird seeing Cheech and Chong in a Marty movie, though, because they've become, maybe they haven't become, maybe they always were, but they're so overtly comedic now, and they feel almost out of place. And like, they don't feel out of place in this movie because they're used pretty sparingly. But when they're on screen, you're just like, those aren't characters in a movie. That's Cheech and Chong.
Yeah, I had the same feeling. They're doing the Cheech and Chong act, which we know well. And I had to look it up. I was like, did Marty discover them? And this was fresh because they hadn't done that act in other movies. And no, that's not actually the case. Their first movie was like 78, and they had done like 6 feature films by the time they were in this. So they were basically like rehashing their act in Marty's movie, which makes it a weirder choice to me. It works. It reminds you that the movie is a comedy, and maybe not to go back and feel so bad about Marcy or whatever other things happen, because they're doing their funny routine.
Yeah. How bad could this world be if Cheech and Chong are out there just having the time of their lives, stealing everything that's not nailed down? I did like your observation about the ending here, though.
Yeah. You talked about how Spielberg chimed in about how he thought it should end. And
yeah, he wanted Paul to be like on the side of the highway screaming like, they're coming, the invaders are coming. I was like, Steven Spielberg, what the fuck are you talking about, man?
Yeah, that's a different movie, bro. That's War of the Worlds. You can go and make that later on.
Still a banger.
Yeah, this has a really nice wrap up, and you kind of see it coming as they're speeding uptown. It telegraphs it. It shows you the street numbers going by. Like, wait, they're going into his neighborhood. He falls out of the van, and it's right in front of these very iconic gates that are established in the opening part of the movie. That his building has these big brass gates.
Not his home building, his office building.
His office building, yeah, has these gates that the security guards open and close.
He's not at his house. He's at his office.
So he goes straight to the office. He's still in his suit. It's a little worse for wear, and he sits down. And it's another message about New York City that the nights might be crazy, but whatever happens, you get up and you go right back to work the next morning.
You darn tootin'. And that's After Hours.
Yeah.
We liked it.
Good little movie.
Yeah. And it was like 89 minutes, which thank fucking God after all the marathons we've been subjecting ourselves to lately.
Yeah. How cool. A 90-minute movie, super fast pace. It's definitely, I was going to be like, if you're a Scorsese fan, it's worth checking out. But I'm like, who's not a Scorsese fan? Who doesn't have at least some Scorsese movie that like, oh yeah, that's among their favorites?
Right.
It seems like it'd be hard to find.
And if you're a Scorsese fan, why have you not seen After Hours already? Just get on it, man.
I did. No, I did.
You did. Yeah, I know. That was directed at you. That was being mean. Do you want to hear where some of these people went after this movie?
Yeah. Finally, we're going back to 85. So lifetimes have occurred since then.
True lifetimes, because I was not even born in 1985.
Ooh.
Now I'm a grown-ass man. Martin Scorsese, born in, drumroll, Flushing, my hood.
That's your hood.
My hometown.
I thought maybe you were a College Point guy.
College Point is technically part of Flushing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like Fresh Meadows, Whitestone, College Point, and Bayside, I think are all considered part of Flushing.
Ooh, I'm cataloging all this in my head.
See?
For one day when I get to Queens.
You better call me.
And I get to visit the famous exploding Pepsi Cola fireworks factory.
If it's still there. It might have exploded. 1982's King of Comedy made just $2.5 million on a $19 million budget. So if we wanted to cover just the most bombingest of movies, that one certainly would have beat out After Hours. But like King of Comedy's certainly on the short list. But then The Color of Money came in 1986. Last Temptation of Christ came, which was not a universally loved movie, but it was successful. So it kept him in the studio's good graces. And then he made Goodfellas in 1990. But his box office returns are much less reliable than you might think of for somebody who's revered as one of the great filmmakers in history. 2013's Wolf of Wall Street was his actual last box office hit. Okay. And he's worked a lot since then. He made Silence and Killers of the Flower Moon, which both really lost a ton of money. And then The Irishman was made for Netflix and only got a couple weeks in theaters, but it was quite expensive.
Lost leader.
Exactly. I do love The Irishman, though.
It's got to do that one. I love the theme song, I Am the Irishman, made famous on Twitter.
I think you were the first one to show me that.
Is it really good? I fell asleep trying to watch it because it was like long.
It's certainly meandering.
Slow moving.
It is slow moving. I think he's doing his level best to undo the glorification of the American mafia that he may have perpetrated with Goodfellas and Casino and The Departed to some extent. Because a lot of the main characters die of old age. And it's like, this is what life is like when you've been a murderous piece of shit your entire existence. Like, you don't have a lot of support when you're old and incontinent, which is like an interesting way to go with it.
I mean, it sounds like a worthy project, the incontinent gangster movie. I'll have to tune in sometime. And
incontinence is not a big theme in it. I'm just guessing.
Okay.
Like, you see some of these guys in their old man makeup, you're like, that guy shit his pants today.
Poor guys.
No, they killed Jimmy Hoffa. They had to come.
Yeah, okay. They deserve it. Fuck them.
Because Jimmy Hoffa was a great man. No, I think he was a bad person too.
Hard to take sides.
Hard to take sides. Scorsese's next movie is rumored to be a project he's been working on for a really long time, which it seems like every Martin Scorsese movie is just a project he's been like conceiving of since the 90s. Maybe he'll make it one day. It's going to be Devil in the White City, which would reunite him with Leonardo DiCaprio as serial killer H.H. Holmes, who basically made a booby-trapped house to kill people in.
I never knew exactly what that book was about. I think I tried picking up the book one time. It's quite a popular novel, and that's all I need to know about it. That sounds like a great pairing, a banger of a popular book with Scorsese and DiCaprio.
I mean, they already did it with Shutter Island, and that was one of my faves.
Totally.
I'm a big Dennis Lehane fan, so
yeah,
that's a great adaptation. Which I always forget that was a Marty movie. It doesn't really feel like a Marty movie.
Yeah.
I might rewatch that one this weekend, actually. I've been meaning to go back to that. And then Joe Minion, we mentioned, he wrote it. He's mostly known for this and the absolute bug shit crazy Nicolas Cage movie Vampire's Kiss. He's worked irregularly. I think he teaches screenwriting a little bit as his like day job, but he also wrote Motorama, On the Run, and The Collection. And then he wrote and directed Trafficking. All these movies are quite aged at this point, so I feel like he's more or less just moved on to teaching. As for Griffin Dunne, he was already a bit of a commodity at this point. You mentioned American Werewolf in London, also Johnny Dangerously.
Oh, okay.
That was Michael Keaton, wasn't it? Johnny Dangerously?
I was going to say Michael Keaton. Yeah, that's who I picture. And Joe Piscopo, maybe?
Yeah, that feels right.
Back when he was something.
I like Johnny Dangerously. It's a good movie. And then he's worked literally nonstop since the 80s. Maybe, like we said, maybe not a household name, but to be a working actor for 40 years, that's something to be proud of.
Sure.
And he's done stuff like My Girl, Practical Magic, Dallas Buyers Club, Ocean's 8, and recently The French Dispatch. So he's still like working with high profile directors in big projects.
He's just getting in there when he needs to and staying relevant. I like that.
And then we mentioned some of the shows he did, like This Is Us and Goliath, but he also did House of Lies and the most recent season, I believe, of Only Murders in the Building.
Oh, cool. That's a good gig.
Yeah. Seems like everyone's popping up on that show. His next project is a Darren Aronofsky crime thriller called Caught Stealing, and he'll be in that with Austin Butler, Zoe Kravitz, and Matt Smith.
Nice.
So that sounds interesting. Aronofsky's very hit or miss for me, but it sounds like a little more of a back to basics story for him, which could be good.
I don't even know if I like Aronofsky, but I'm curious for the sound of that one.
Yeah, we got to get some Aronofsky on the pod just so I can prove to you how much you don't like him.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to explore that.
He's got many movies we could cover, so we'll just have to pick a few. Rosanna Arquette was also a accomplished actor by the time After Hours came out. She was a known commodity as well. She'd been in The Aviator, Desperately Seeking Susan, and Silverado, all in 1985 before After Hours came out. And then she's done stuff like Nowhere to Run, which I actually rewatched not too long ago, the Kevin Costner political thriller. It's pretty solid. Pulp Fiction, Crash, the 96 Cronenberg one, The Whole Nine Yards. And of course, oh no, we have had her on the pod previously. She was in Draft Day.
I had forgotten that. I saw that in the notes and I looked it up. She was the ex-wife of the Costner character.
Which I guess in and of itself is a nice callback to Nowhere to Run. And then she also starred in Ray Donovan, Ratched, and Big Sky. Sky. I hear Big Sky is not bad.
Oh, okay.
I thought this was a fun little tidbit about her. The song Rosanna by Toto may very well be about her because she was dating Toto's keyboard player at the time that song was released, and also was dating Peter Gabriel when In Your Eyes came out. So that might also be about her.
I heard that same rumor, and I did a little research to be like, holy shit, that's pretty impressive to name two big songs. And they're both sort of like, no, it's best not to dig too deep because it's fun to think so. And maybe that's not true, but
the Peter Gabriel one, at least they were just like, he's always said he'll never definitively say one way or another.
And I saw like the Toto guys, some of them are still around, and I saw them joking about it in a YouTube thing, but they're like, we thought it was funny to say so, but it wasn't written for her so much, but it was just fun to connect the dots because David Page, the keyboard player, was dating her.
Now, Ian, I know you have some history and some experience as a drummer. I need to ask, can you do the Rosanna Shuffle?
Not like Jeff Porcaro could, but nobody really could make that claim since. But
it is a fucking tough rhythm to do.
It's really hard. I never could really do it on the drum kit, but I'm a bit of a finger drummer and I can fake it on the pads.
All right.
Maybe someday I'll have a YouTube channel where I do dumb musical stuff like that. I'll keep you posted.
I think that would be rad. And then I just sent you this. I guess this movie was technically made in 2023, but it's just starting to hit streaming services now, where she plays the soon-to-be ex-wife of Griffin Dunne in a new film called Ex-Husbands, which I hear is like a pretty good dramedy that I definitely want to check out now.
Yeah, I'm going to have to see that for sure, just to see their faces together again on screen.
That'd be nice. And then I wanted to give a little bit of a retrospective on Fiorentino, who I know doesn't have a huge role in this movie, but it's a memorable one. She's also had just a very interesting kind of journey through Hollywood. So she was ahead of the curve on calling people out for sexism and misogyny in Hollywood. She called out Warner Brothers executive Mark Canton for saying to her during the filming of 1985's Vision Quest that, quote, "You have a great ass, but I think your jeans need to be tighter."
Classy.
It's not a great thing to say to somebody.
No, not when you're their boss, especially.
And she said, like, she left Hollywood, but then she had lots of bills. So she came back to Hollywood and she kept trying to find a way to stop acting. And she did eventually. She retired in 2009. She was still pretty young and probably could have had lots of more roles coming her way. But like we mentioned, Jade, Men in Black, The Last Seduction, Dogma were her big films. And then she threw in the towel.
Good for her to be able to live her life the way she wanted to. A bummer if it's really like she was driven out because Hollywood was spoiled for her.
Whatever reckoning we briefly had, it felt like she just wasn't interested in throwing her hat in the ring and trying to get back in there. Hopefully she's enjoying life. Found peace.
Let's hope. We hope that for everyone. We're a positive podcast in that sense.
Most of the time.
We even want Adam Sandler to live a good life sometimes.
Hey, he got Kanye to stop being a Nazi or something.
That's something in his favor. Yeah. Gotta admit.
It's no small thing, because he loves being a Nazi, apparently. Do you want to hear what we're doing next? And do you even know already?
I don't know. Lay it on me. This is the old style where I get a raw surprise.
A raw surprise.
I don't know why I got that phrase.
I don't know. Now I'm wondering. So this is a movie that I have a deep affection for, but I'm very scared to watch, in the same sense of many of the movies we cover, where I'm like, I don't know how well this is aged. It's a movie Jake Gyllenhaal would like you to forget that it exists.
Okay.
It is 2001's comedy Bubble Boy.
Ooh, I mistook that for an Adam Sandler. Speaking of the Sandman, but it's Gyllenhaal.
It's Gyllenhaal. It's directed by Blair Hayes, which I feel like might be one of those pseudonyms that people use when they don't want to be known as the director of something.
Never the best sign.
But it's got Danny Trejo, Marley Shelton, John Carroll Lynch, our boy from Zodiac, is in there.
Love to see him on screen again.
I think it was like my first introduction to Zach Galifianakis was in that movie. He has a very small but very funny role. I remember liking this movie, and even at the time when I was like 14 years old, being like, this feels mildly problematic.
Oh.
So I wonder how I'm going to grapple with that now.
Okay.
But it'll be fun to figure it out.
Another one for us to wrangle with, but we've done it before. We'll figure out how to deal with the Bubble Boy.
So that'll be fun. Oh, no. Blair Hayes is a real person. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to besmirch his good name.
Oh, okay.
That is a real guy.
Well, at least he's standing behind his movie.
He just doesn't have a Wikipedia. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. That was After Hours. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe to the pod if you can. We appreciate it. Helps new listeners find the pod.
It really helps us.
You can follow us on Twitter at BlastZonePod or Blue Sky, blastzonepod.bluesky.com or whatever the thing is.
Yep.
Email us, blastzonepod@gmail.com. You have any questions, feedback, movie suggestions, just want to chat about movies. We love hearing from you.
We do.
And we'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.